Well, let me start by let me start by thanking the organizers for inviting me to deliver this paper titled Energy Transition and Climate Change, Pathway for Sustainable Development in Africa. I have divided this paper into 6 segments: the introduction, the concept of energy transition, challenges and economics of climate change in actions, unlocking the clean energy opportunities in Africa, and the strategy for achieving sustainable energy transition, and finally, my possible suggestions and conclusion. Well, everybody knows what climate change is all about. Article 1 of United Nations Framework Convention defines it to mean the response of the Earth's climate system to the altered concentration of greenhouse gases to the atmosphere. It is the change attributed directly or indirectly to anthropogenic emissions, that is human activities, that alter the composition of the global atmosphere and which, in addition to national climate variabilities, observed over a comparable period of time. As a general introduction, it is without much ado that energy is life. Without energy, we cannot see. We cannot produce. We cannot live well. And so, but for today, the main source of energy for our industrial and domestic use is derived from fossil energy, that is either from coal, oil, and natural gas. The effect of that is that there is a problem between the use of fossil fuel as a source of energy as well as the environmental implication arising from both production and consumption of it. But the ultimate impact is on the climate change. Now we are caught between the deep sea and the devil. We cannot do without having energy, and at the same time we cannot produce without creating pollution. So what is the next way forward? Because energy is so important to mankind in terms of domestic, in terms of industrial, and for all purposes, there must be a way for the world to move. And the only way that developed countries or global policymakers have decided to move forward is to transit from fossil-based energy to decarbonize national economy by reducing the greenhouse economy and moving to zero level clean energy in terms of renewable energy. That's an ambitious project. We must say that. It is ambitious looking at it both from the point of view of an African as well as even from the developed country per se, because no country in the world as at today can achieve 100% renewable energy as a source of its energy. So it has to be an admixture of the two. But even in the process of doing that, there is the conscious effort on the part of world leaders through various agreements, Paris Agreement, UNFCCC, and Kyoto Protocol, to reduce emission and to come up with technology that will mitigate the harsh effect of the climate change. In this paper, I will just look at how my concern in this paper is how do we as Africans take benefit of the new movement from transition to 100% fossil-based source of energy to either the complete zero-sum level or admixture of the two. We've just heard this morning that the policy of government is that as far as they are concerned, gas is still our own transition. Do not forget, and that's one thing that we normally say, anytime there is an environmental agreement, there is also an economic benefit. I will draw into that later. What is energy transition, African energy challenges, and economic of climate change? Energy transition for purposes of Africa, in the context of Africa, is the manner at which the world should switch from carbon-intensive to climate-resilient pathways, and how the cost of historical and current emission should not be shouldered by countries whose contribution to previous and present greenhouse gas emission is negligible. The whole of Africa contribution is 3% to the global anthropogenic emissions, GHG emissions. Meanwhile, African countries have taken so much commitments to reduce emissions. What have we emitted that we are also taking so much? But we have to do it. You see, we say this. The Western world wants us to take environmental matters, but they never talk about our development. Sometimes they will say, oh, we want this, we want that. What about our own development? You don't want us to develop. We derive revenue from crude oil. You don't want to use our crude oil again. We don't have the technology to produce the renewable energy we are talking about. Are we going to go into the lagoon as an Africans? Of course not. So if you look at the energy transition system as it affects us in Africa, there are two ways to look at it. The first concern is about how Africa can develop appropriate technology that can harness the abundant renewable energy in Africa to transform and accelerate its economy and improve the living standards of African people. The second concern is how the laws and damages and other climate change mechanisms, including climate change finance, can equitably compensate Africa for the impact of historical and current emission by developed countries. I'm not concerned about the second aspect, because that is like another round of aids and begging for money, begging for technology. If we are going to stay on that one, Africa will continue to be at the back seat and will not be able to move forward. I'm more concerned about how Africans can take advantage of the new impetus towards renewable energy and make sure that we have clean technology and clean energy, as well as improving the living standard of our people. Now, there are various challenges and economies of climate change that if we don't take any step at all, what will happen to us in Africa if we don't take any step at all? Assuming we decided that we are not going to join the race. Well, empirical evidence has shown that we will continue to feel the impact of climate change in terms of intensive weather conditions that we can see regularly. Heavy rainfall inducing flooding and drought that we see regularly. People living in Lagos can tell you very well the impact of sea level rise, or people in the coastal areas, with very serious consequence on human health and habitats. Those are the impacts of climate change. What about our inaction or inactivities to take steps to have the clean modern technology, the clean energy that they are talking about, the renewable energy? If we're unable to do that, our inaction is that we'll be unable and incapable to harness our renewable energy potentials to fulfill the developmental needs, including building climate change, climate resilient means, in order for us to survive the adverse impact of climate change. 2, we face challenges of huge energy gaps. A continent that we're unable to supply basic electricity to majority of our citizens, even through the normal fossil fuel induced energy production. How then do we now talk about renewable energy? So there's critical energy gap, which there are so many statistics, and this morning one of the presenters made that point very clear. So what's going to happen? We also have the issue of huge energy gap to enable us implement climatic resilience and climatic readiness measures, and adaptative measures that are included in Kyoto Protocol, as well as the UNFCCC and Paris Agreement. Our lack of access to reliable and affordable energy poses a major constraint, even in our agricultural production and post-harvest processing. We produce, we don't have means of storing our facilities. Energy drives everything. Africa is equally faced with the dual challenge of expanding electricity provisions to all its people, as well as building a sustainable energy system. You see, we have a problem. The one that is based on fossil fuel, we are still yet able to provide energy for our people, for domestic use, for domestic, even for production purposes and industrial purposes. Now, we have the challenges of climate change in order to reduce the impact on us. Again, we also need to develop climate change technologies to adapt to the renewable energy. That is double jeopardy. But how do we move forward? How do we unlock these potentials? Every multilateral environmental agreement, if you take a critical look at it, is a mix of both environmental and economic agreement. From UNFCCC to Kyoto Protocol to UN Seal to Paris Agreement, you will find it needs certain economic inducements and opportunities which can be tapped into. After discussing the various impacts of climate change, this is what is going to happen to you. The next thing the white people made us to believe is that now let us move towards renewable energy. Let us start trading, emission trading. Let us transfer technology to the people in vulnerable states and developing countries. Those are economic opportunities that the developed country put into that legal instrument for purposes of exploiting us, even in Africa. And in one of the conferences, we asked the question, do you still want to keep Africa down? You don't want to buy our oil again. We don't know how to produce the renewable resources. Is it you that will also bring again the renewable resources materials for us when we have it in abundance in our country? That is where my next slide will talk about. The transition from fossil fuel energy to next to zero carbon emission is not without its cost. It calls for innovation in the design, production, and marketing of clean technology, and open a viable opportunity for scientists, for engineers, and clean technologies investors to develop climate adaptive technology in return for profit for their investment. That is the key. That's just it is an opportunity for African scientists. I'm not talking about the whites or the developed country. For African scientists, for young people to develop innovative technologies in such a way that we can adapt to the climate sensitivities that has been predicted to us in Africa. I used to say this to everybody. It will be very, very difficult for an African person to win Nobel Prize in medicine or in engineering or science. And I'll tell you the reason. Nobody, go and look at the history of Nobel Prize. You can get Nobel Prize for peace. This is for young scientists. You can't get for engineering. And the simple reason is that those that were giving Nobel Prizes in those areas, they were able to discover innovations that solve the problem of their own people. If Africa cannot solve its own problem, how do you expect to get Nobel Prize? We have malaria. We are still buying malaria drug designed by the developed country. What about our own technology? Where are our scientists? Where are our engineers? Now that we have the issue of renewable energy, do we need Indians to come and give us renewable energy to develop technology for us in Africa? So that, and at what cost if they have to do so? This will call for us to collaborate either individually or with fellow African scientists or engineers or investors in order to develop what we call a homegrown technology that is adaptable to our own environment, given our own resources. We can't depend on developed countries or Europe or America. They won't come. It is not their concern. They will not come. And if they have to come, the cost will be higher. How did India get away from the shackles of developed countries' control? They sent a lot of their people abroad. They brought them back. They studied the technology and adapted to the needs of the Indian people. Now we go there for medical facilities. We depend on them for some drugs at certain particular time. We are depending on China for production of solar. And what kind of solar do we have? Solar panels, some of them are not durable. So it will require us to develop appropriate renewable energy, which should be addressed to provide access to many African people who lack access and whose main source of energy are batteries, kerosene, or paraffin lamps, or cooking with firewood and waste. Access to energy will provide a direct benefit in terms of poverty reduction and improved health. And access to modern, clean, and safe energy is equivalent to entering a new life. That's a fact. If you go to a house that they don't have light before and you give them light now, you will see how happy they will be. We have so many abundant renewable resources in Africa, like biomass, hydropower, solar, wind and tidal, and geothermal, among other things, which Africa can develop to meet its industrial and domestic uses. And the future lies in the hands of our African engineers, scientists, and investors. Examples of countries that have taken advantage of solar, of renewable resources. In biofuel, Brazil in 2008 managed to source over 50% of its total national automobile transportation from bioethanol. While Brazil is the long-established ethanol leader, this is nevertheless significant as it is the first time that a renewable energy is obtain a dominant position in any major market. In the US, wind installation represents over 40% of all new electricity generating in 2008, adding a capacity of 8 gigawatts, moved the US ahead of Germany as the world leading generator of wind energy. What happened to our own wind? We have not done anything with it. In solar photovoltaic market, over 4 gigawatts of capacity was installed in 2008. Though smaller than the wind energy market, this represents remarkable growth, considering the industry crossed the 1 gigawatt threshold as recently as 2004. So how do we achieve sustainable energy transition in Africa? They said the soup that is very good, na money kill am. To develop alternative renewable energy is not free. It comes with its own cost implication. And quite frankly, Africans have always been dragged by the issue of we don't have fund, no money. There are many, even in advanced countries. I teach secure credit transactions. I know about capital market operation and all sorts of things like that. Every system will devise a means to encourage an industry. And that we need the support of the government. Individual money may not be enough. Equity may not be enough. Borrowing may not be enough from banks. For example, even when they sold disco to so many private companies, the money to generate electricity, to run this organization, they don't have. They've borrowed, is not enough. Then they have to look eastward and externally. In that wise, there is the need for government to get what we call funding from multilateral development banks, ADB, IMF, Afrexim, International Financial Corporation, specifically to grow this industry. The only problem we have in Africa is that when we say we are going to World Bank, particularly in my country, Nigeria, is the problem of corruption. If money is taken for a purpose, if we are utilizing it for the purpose in the appropriate context in which it is being utilized, we will be able to see the results. If we borrow money, either from a private bank or from multinational development organizations, and those money were not channeled or they were overpriced. At the end of the day, the cost will be more than the benefit. And so these are some of the areas that our policymakers need to work into. There is the need for government to provide the infrastructure. And what do we mean by infrastructure? The enabling environment for scientists, for African scientists, to be able to come together to find a reasonable solution to this issue of clean technology. An individual cannot do it alone. You need collaboration. And once you find collaboration, either within or outside Africa, for purposes of developing a homegrown technology that will be climate resilient, then it must also be backed up by funding. Funding from external sources you can't get without government backing or government guarantee. This is where the intervention of government becomes very important. Otherwise, we will not be able to develop our own renewable energy that will meet our domestic needs, either for domestic or for industrial purposes. Another way that government can help is that when we find reasonable investors in the renewable energy sector, then government should be able to provide guarantee for some of those loans, properly monitored to ensure that the real reasons behind the loan is utilized. This is what developed countries do for their investors. This is what they do to encourage investors. All the people you see them doing solar, they bring everything. They have government backing. No individual, no amount of savings from your family savings can you use to set up a company that is highly capital intensive. Another means that government can do is to also encourage capital markets in those areas, renewable resources. Companies that want to go into renewable resources, government should provide the enabling environment to enable them access capital market, to borrow money, to get easy funding, cheap money. If that is done, you will see a lot of people showing interest in the industry, getting returns for their profit. Another means that government can, because some of this thing is not purely, even if you have the whole idea and you don't have finance, the whole idea will die. So that is why the emphasis is far more on government than an individual. The last point to make in terms of support for renewable energy is to use the export credit agency. If we move to the level that we can see 2 or 3 or 4, 5 African countries coming up with a product that is adaptable for many countries, then the export credit agency can guarantee some of those things, which will make it to be marketable in other countries, so that they will be able, in other African countries, so that they will be able to make money, get the returns for their investment, and then improve on their technology. We must first of all make mistake before we move forward. There is the need, finally, there is the need to industrialize. If we do all these things, Africa will increase its significant, there will be a scale up in electricity sector investment in generation and grid. We'll be able to improve on our agricultural needs and every other areas. In conclusion, Africa has abundant renewable energy. Africa is a home to many of the mineral resources that are critical to driving global energy. Our rapid economic, political, population growth, and the resultant demand for reliable and steady energy will have profound implications for the energy sector. It is therefore become imperative for African policymakers, relevant stakeholders, such as the investors, scientists, and business community, to open up viable avenues for innovation, finance, and growth. If this is done, then Africa can be ready for the new transition to the modern energy. There is a rising demand for renewable energy in African states, particularly in Nigeria, where we have so many of us not having access to electricity. If you see the amount of money being invested in solar energy, in alternative energy providers, you will find out that people are yearning for this renewable energy. If this is done and is encouraged by government, there is a hope for better Africa, both in terms of our domestic need and industrial need. Thank you much for your attention.